Come on, machine. Hey, welcome to Talking Niagara this morning. This is Friday, July 19th. 19th of July. Hey, the year's almost over, Mike. What's up?
Summer's gone quick, eh? Good morning, Niagara.
Yeah,
Yep, summer's gone
we're
quick.
actually, yeah, we're nearing the halfway point to summer, aren't we?
Yep, yep, and
Or it
it's
feels
it's
like it.
gone fast. Like, where'd it go?
Well, and the weirdest thing is, we had hot weather early, and the last few weeks have tempered down a bit, haven't they?
Yeah, very strange weather.
Yeah.
Even the storms we get, and we're getting clouds almost every day, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a
Well, the
strange
last,
weather pattern because you got the United States getting 100-degree weather for over 21 days, like, and here we are getting cool weather all the time, right?
well, yeah, you see, the last week, I'm not carrying traditionally, even in England, I'm not carrying a raincoat in July. The
Yeah,
last
and then
week
if
I've
this,
been carrying a raincoat every day because it just looks as if it's going to come down.
yeah, and then the sun comes out and the temperature goes up about 15 degrees.
Yeah.
It's quite a swing, eh? Sun's behind the
Well, and the
clouds and then
thing
the sun
is,
comes out.
yeah, and that we've had all this rain as well. We've had a lot of rain over the last few weeks.
And considering our winter, we needed it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you see, will we see snow again?
Yeah, because you look at our winter, we had a really dry winter, right? We didn't have very
Yeah,
much
we
precipitation in the winter at all.
yeah, we didn't have, yeah, exactly. But then what's this doing for our grapes and things like that, and the crops?
I don't know how the crops are doing because there were a couple mornings there where it frosted over, and I don't know if it damaged them or not, but everybody was worried about it at the time, right?
Okay. Did anybody find the past council meeting very calm and professional with Victor at the helm? He protrudes that. Unfortunately, there's so many fires burning under that, under that chairmanship that I'm not so sure that's any better.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that don't even talk to each other. So um, I don't know if he's the guy to pick for leader, but uh,
I
it is.
wouldn't.
No,
I
I
wouldn't
don't.
vote for him.
I think he's kind of slimy. Gary knows he's slimy. there's huge problems and underlying problems in city council where some of them don't even talk to each other at all. And what kind of a council is that?
Well, some of them just fling mud, and then you get and then you get. There's a point where everybody in the room has kind of gone, yes, 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 we're voting for that, and Wayne Thompson gets up and goes, well, I think this is a wonderful idea, da di da di da. Vote for me at the next election, da di da di da type thing, right? He doesn't
Yeah.
actually say vote for me at the next election, but what's the hell is the point of rising on a subject where everybody's already agreed on it?
Well, everybody except for Mona, she puts up her hand and says, "What are we voting for again?"
Well, actually, that's not a dumb thing to do sometimes, right?
No, but she's asking how to vote more than she is what to vote. You know, I've seen sometimes she asks how to vote, and my jaw drops. Pardon? This is that's you're supposed to decide how to vote, right? Like,
Yeah, I know, I know. Yeah. Okay, so where are we? Okay, so is crime on the rise? There's a couple of crime stories I sent you today. One is about this Uber driver who grabbed a woman's breast. Well, and actually that belays the truth of the story, because he took her on a ride before he grabbed her breast.
And he even mentioned how big her breasts were.
Yeah. It was like he was really into, hey, how about you and me, babe? How about it? Right, type thing, right?
Well, number one, I don't ever support Uber. I never believed in it in the first place, and don't think it should have been allowed. Number two, their licensed drivers, are they going through vetting process like you would an interview?
That was the big question in the beginning, because the thing is, when you get when you go in and you get a taxi on, Central Taxi or St. Catherine's Taxi or Yellow, you're getting a person who has actually been checked by the police.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So in their first week or so, in order to get efficiency, when they've never driven before, they get their temporary taxi license, and that temporary taxi license allows them to start the work as a taxi driver. Once they've started work, they about 2 weeks later, they're called into Niagara Police Headquarters, and they're in part of a class about how taxi drivers should behave, what the rules are, etc., etc. And they're taught about criminal records check. And at that point, if they had a criminal record, they would be told they're not having a license.
Yeah, they deny the license right away. Or would it depend on what the record was, or
well, I believe it's theft. I believe it's serious theft, or
sexual assault or rape.
Assault, especially sexual assault.
Yeah. Yeah, so that makes sense, and that should be done, and I don't think Uber does that. And even
that was always the beginning. That was always the problem at the beginning, which is one reason why they say you shouldn't be taking Uber. But of late, I believe Uber has done something about that.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look like it with this case, does it?
Yeah.
I believe it's a problem, and I'll never support Uber. A taxi driver and all these taxi cabs, they have to pay for a license.
Well, the other thing about a taxi cab is you go into many taxi cabs in many cities, and I believe Ontario has a rule that you actually have to have cameras in the car. Right. So on the dashboard, there's a camera mounted that will, for example, take the road pictures of what's going on in the road, but will also take the pictures in the cab itself. So, and it's also a fireable offence to remove the SD card from the cab.
Right. So if the same rules don't apply to Uber, the same rules of licensing don't apply to Uber, why do taxi companies have to pay all this extra when Uber doesn't? It was never a fair thing in the first place, and still is not. And I don't believe that they're vetted as well as the taxi cab drivers myself.
And let's be clear though. The vast majority of Uber drivers just want to earn $50 extra cash, and nothing like that has ever entered their mind, right?
Yes. Yeah. They're looking for the cash money under the table, which again brings in the question, are they legally allowed to work in Canada? Are these things looked at by Uber, right? I really don't support it at all, and never will.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, but I do understand why people want to do it. There's always been the illegal taxi cabs, hasn't there?
Yes.
And all that really Uber has done is legalize the illegal taxi cabs.
Correct.
I saw one of my neighbors coming in one time in what would have been called at the time a speedy.
Right.
Do you remember the speedy?
They're still alive.
Yeah. I know they are. Anyway, what happened is she was brought up to her door, and you should have seen the state of the car. Bleeding neck. The wheels are about 50 miles from falling off.
Right.
The things are a rust junker. And I said to her, "Do you really want to take your life in your hands like that, and risk your life like that?" And she said, "Yeah, but I can't afford a cab." And the truth of the matter is that they weren't that much difference in price. Speedy weren't, you know.
They were probably half price.
Well, yeah,
Speedy was probably about half price. And again, I won't support anything like that either. I just
yeah,
can't go over. I got morals, right? I believe in supporting people that work for fairly, and
yeah,
and people that have licenses for it. I believe in supporting all that, right?
yeah.
I don't believe in this underground stuff, and I don't believe in supporting any of it, and I don't understand why people do. Like you said, they can't afford it, and affordability is the big issue on everything, isn't it? Like,
But again, here's the question about this. It's like, okay, so I remember when I first learned to drive, and I'm thinking how expensive it was to hire a driving instructor.
right?
But what I didn't think about at the time, and I hold my hand up to this, is kind of, well, how much is a factory worker going to pay? And okay, so how much an hour do you pay the factory worker in that local area? And do you think that you wouldn't be paying the driving instructor at least that?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So when it came down to it, and I don't remember what the amount is, but let's say the average factory worker was at the time on, let's say, $8 an hour. Would you pay, why wouldn't you be paying your driving instructor $15 an hour?
It's an important
Right.
job for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
and
because the
teachers,
guy's risking his car.
yeah.
He's got a license that he's trained for, right, etc., etc. And yet, actually, today we have people who damn well just won't pay a penny on anything.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
and with all the people claiming asylum, those driving instructors are really, really busy 24/7 now. They're
Yeah,
training people around the clock, and they drive through my neighborhood all the time, practicing parking and stuff, right? Um,
yeah.
so they're making big bucks right now. But
But
all
you know
around,
what?
I believe crime in this city is going up. A lot of
Yeah.
a lot of thievery out of cars, a lot of thievery in
Well,
stores. The stores are they don't know what to do anymore, right? Um,
that's actually the worst of it. Is actually store theft, right?
Crazy.
Because this is actually something. Okay, I've got a double-edged sword here. We'll get to that. So store theft. When you look at it, so somebody breaks into a store, robs them, and takes. Let's say they steal something off the shelves. Which basically means that the store then puts the price up for everything that is stolen, right?
They got to
Because
make up for the loss somewhere, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So what essentially happens is somebody goes in, probably not if if the person's stolen an apple, or a plum or an orange or something like that. Probably one of those wouldn't make a difference. But you steal a $5 item off the store. The store is essentially going to spread that $5 loss across everything else in the store by putting it up by penny.
Well, Shoppers Drug Mart had crews coming in and cleaning out all the cosmetics and things like that. And they're professional crews, right? And they're
Yeah,
coming in and cleaning the whole place out and leaving before anybody could even blink, man.
yeah.
And they're getting away with a lot, like a
And
lot of
putting
money's
these
worth of merchandise.
new barriers in the store has not made any difference whatsoever.
Well, they got to hire security.
Well,
I don't
even with
see any
security,
other way around it. You got people making minimum wage, and you're asking them to risk their life with all this thievery, right? And
well,
going after the thieves. People making minimum wage don't deserve that kind of stress. You got to get security of some sort in there.
yeah, but you see, putting in the fences that they have done in the Loblaw stores, pretty well all of them. Great Canadian Superstore in St. Catharines, our one Zares up here. Many other of them have now got these opening gates, for security. And the point about these gates is that won't actually stop the gangs. The gangs will go in, they'll out there, filter across the areas. They've been told targets. They load their pockets. Each of them loads their pockets with, like, let's say, $50, $100 worth, and they're out of the store before you even know it. They've met up outside and they're off doing it again somewhere else, back in the bus and doing it somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I got a friend that watched it. It's fast. It's professional. Yeah. It's really quickly done.
And then that's stocking up. What they're doing is stocking up for now an illegal store that sells cut price beauty products, right?
Yep. I'll be back in 1 minute.
Yeah. Anyway, so the point being is that's one of the cases, was this Uber driver. The other of the cases that is here is a New Brunswick man was charged with human trafficking in Welland. Right, so Niagara Regional Police arrested this guy from New Brunswick after an investigation launched in April into trafficking women from Niagara. And the accused is from Bathurst, New Brunswick. And the police said it's believed there could be further victims in both Ontario and New Brunswick. And at the moment, that's just another one of these crimes going up. This is a particularly brutal crime, of course, when you're talking about trafficking of people. Usually when you're talking trafficking of women, you're talking it for prostitution in some foreign land.
Yeah, and it's like a blackmail system to get people into the country, and once they're here and trapped in that system, they're trapped, right? They get them addicted to something usually, and then once they're addicted, they're really trapped, right?
Yeah.
And again, I've said to you before, night auditors see the system happening all the time because they go from one hotel to the next. They never stay in one hotel the same night, right?
Yeah.
And they go from one hotel to the next. It's a whole circuit. And night auditors and taxi cab drivers can tell you when these things are happening. Taxi cab drivers are a great resource of finding out what's happening in the city. They know the night crawlers, right?
Yeah. I never knew, when I was serving my time as a taxi cab driver, I never knew of any trafficking stuff, but but I could tell you all the drug dens.
Right. Which is,
yeah. And the interesting thing about that is that a drug den would open it in a particular street. And then, so it's the same person because you go from street A, and then you're on street C, right? And all the customers that used to take the taxi to go to street A now will take the taxi to go to street C.
Yes.
Right. And then 6 months later, they're all taking the taxi to go to street F.
Yeah. So, if I was a police officer, those are the resources that I would talk to find out some information on these things, especially trafficking, human trafficking. What a serious issue. And we all know that it's been strong in the Niagara region for quite a while, and a hard thing to shut down.
Yeah. I don't know how you spot trafficking, but then again, maybe just while I was doing that, it wasn't happening so much as it is now. But I'm sure those that are working there today probably do know a bit more about spotting trafficking.
It's probably not much more than much more different than watching hookers and their pimps, right? Because that's all they are, right? Is a glorified pimp only taking girls from Russia or Hungary or someplace else that are really in need of a different citizenship or something, and then getting them in the trap, right?
Yeah.
And it's a little bigger than just being a pimp and a hooker because of that, right? Because of the issues of coming into a country and then getting trapped in that kind of system, right?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So without venting about who's in our country, what would you expect would happen? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Especially when you've got unscrupulous local criminals who are dealing with it, right? Niagara Falls taxi $50 to St. Kitts. Speedy is 40.
So inflation has happened.
Yeah. Well, in fact, yeah. Yeah. So Gary was pointing out that price difference that has happened. They were always a little bit less, but not much less, right? When you let the cops get away with crime, doesn't that follow suit with everyone else? Fair comment.
Hey, if the officers in charge are corrupt, then of course it's going to be a worse system, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that is a fair comment, Gary. Yeah. Thank you for that. All right. So let's move on. We were talking earlier in the week about closures across southwest Ontario beaches, and we then of course, as a result of the flood, there were closures on most of Toronto and Mississauga's beaches. Now there are closures at 10 beaches in or they're telling you not closures directly. You can go sit on the beach if you want, but they're basically saying don't go swimming in the water, right? Because it could be hazardous. 10 beaches in, actually it's more, I think it's more than 10 beaches in Niagara have been closed.
Now we were talking about that and said it was it won't be long before all the beaches here were affected. Yeah. The warmer the water gets, the worse it gets, right? They also blame phosphorus a lot too, right?
Yep.
They blame phosphorus from farming, but we always forget that SciTech here on Welland on Gartner Road, they produce that too, right? And that gets dumped right into the Welland River with their production processes.
So, well, we've got closures at beaches in Grimsby, Port Coburn, Lincoln, Fort Erie, Ridgeway, well, Crystal Beach and Ridgeway, Hamilton, Waynfleet, St. Catharines, I said Grimsby, Niagara on the Lake. So we pretty well all the beaches in this area seem to in those areas are closed. We don't have beaches here in Niagara Falls.
Don't swim in the water, but you could eat the fish.
I wouldn't eat the fish.
Yeah, if we also have a lot of feces going directly into the water. We witnessed, just the United States a couple of years ago when it changed the river black. Remember that? So we got problems where there's mass dumping happening, the Canadian and the United States side, and it's a huge problem. And look at right now, we got all these new houses being built, and we still don't got that wastewater treatment plants to handle what's going on, right? So anytime we have rain overflow and the sewers get mixed together, we always have a huge problem of waste going into the lakes, right?
I think most of this city has now been, all of the new places have sewage separation, right?
Yes.
Most of the older parts of the city have now been converted
they're working on it. There's still some parts that aren't, and a lot of the other older cities aren't up to date, right?
Yeah. We read this article the other week, which was about Toronto not being up to date with sewage separation.
Hamilton's a mess.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Okay, we were criticizing our city for being slow on getting this done. The first sewage separation stuff was put into play. There was money put onto most municipalities' budgets back in as early as about, I think, 2003. They first looked at it.
Yeah, well, think about how many new homes have been built since then.
Yeah, but most of the new
and
homes,
how overloaded our system must be.
yeah, but most new homes will have separate, new subdivisions will all have separated sewage, sewage things, even if they run into, the problem lies is, so my street on 2nd Avenue, it's going to run into Bridge Street. Well, what's the point of having sewage separation here on my street if you're going to stick it into a single sewer on Bridge?
Yeah, and I wonder how many places still have lead pipes that feed water, right? I know the
Well,
city was
that's another part of what they were updating, was making
yeah,
sure
I
that
know the
all the
city's been
water
working on
supply.
getting rid of all that, but there's still some parts that have it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably, more than likely.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had those sewage separation, or you don't know about it having happened in your street, or maybe it's like 25 years since your street has actually had any road resurfacing done, then probably you haven't had yours done.
Well, I'm wondering if our Don Murray Street has the sewer separation, seeing that oil's going into the Welland River still, right? I'm wondering if
That's
they
a
have a
fair
sewer
comment.
separation
Yeah,
system.
that's a fair comment. And many of those streets are very old.
Yes.
Well, in fact,
Yes.
all of those streets are very old, right?
Yep.
And the last time I went down that street, much of the road surface was cracked and in desperate state, and being filled. Basically, they send fill and pat around every year to fill the holes and pat it down.
Yeah, what a waste of taxpayers' money the second a plow goes by.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that they don't fill it in and pat it down well. What I'm just saying is that it's the wrong approach to to curing the fault. But again, yes, places like Don Murray, absolutely, should they be looking at the sewage separation? In fact, actually, they probably need more than that. They probably need industrial runoff as well.
Yeah, there's supposed to be catch basins and everything, and I would almost go as far as, like we were saying before, start monitoring that before it goes into any river, right? Like,
monitor it and divert it as much as possible.
Yeah, because now that we've witnessed within a year 2 different dumpings, then there's got to probably be more than that happening, right?
Yeah, and oil is particularly bad, because the worst about that is that many creatures underneath get trapped by oil where they would normally rise to the surface, and there's surfacing and being under, and there's surfacing and being under, which is a natural part of their day. But when you've got oil slick at the top, those creatures can't get up.
Right. And we also have many people that snowboard, water ski and stuff on the Welland River all the time. Paddleboard.
I hope they're not snowboarding on the river.
Chris Simone does paddleboarding all the time, right?
Paddleboarding, yes.
And that kind of stuff. If there's oil sheen, you're going to get it all over you and on your equipment, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. It might not be deadly, but that might not be deadly to the human user, but it could be very deadly to the animals.
Yeah. So all these beaches, and then now you can't swim in the water. It makes it unreasonable to go to the beach if you can't swim, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I've never taken my grandson to the beach to enjoy it when you can't swim in the water like that, right?
Oh yeah,
It,
no, I wouldn't. I
you
wouldn't
know,
be going if you were going to the beach. Part of going to the beach is to, even if, hey, even if Granny has only dipped her toes in the water and she maybe gets up to just halfway up to her knees. That's part of the reason for going, though. Even she enjoys it, right?
yes,
And
and
and hey, you and I are Granny now, aren't we?
I've taken my grandson to Bissell's Hideaway and stuff like that, but that's man-made lake and that's clean water, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I'd love to go to the beach with them and swim in the water, but every time it gets to the point where the water's warmed up and it's hot, that's when we get the problems of E. coli in the water, right?
Yeah. Well, you see, I'm not so sure I'd go. I might dip my toe in and walk into some of these beaches here, like the Bernard Avenue beach in Ford. Well, sorry, Casablanca Beach in Grimsby. I've been to. I paddled in the water.
Right.
That's about the limit of what I've done in like the last 30 years, to be quite honest. I'm not really into swimming in the ocean. The only time I've ever really gone swimming in the ocean was actually when I was it's about 30 years or 35 years ago, was when I went to Kenya. I went to Mombasa in Kenya and I swam in that ocean.
Right.
All right. Don't really go swimming in oceans at all, in rivers, in lakes and oceans at all.
Yeah. Well,
And that's
living where we do, I always used to. But like I said, once they started saying there's too much E. coli in the water, what's the sense?
yeah. And the thing was in Britain where I grew up, you go swimming on the beach. I loved living in Swanage, right, which is a south coast resort town. I loved living in Swanage. I hardly ever my grandmother lived there, so we went there probably 2 or 3 times a year between Easter and October, right? But I'd never go swimming. I'd sit on the beach. I could sit on the beach for hours, but never go in.
Yeah, well, where I grew up in Silvertown, the Niagara River was our playground. So
Yeah,
we loved the river like we were there every day, right? My
yeah.
poor mom went through shoes like crazy, man.
So you walk down those hills into into that into the valley there. Yeah.
We never used the stairs, eh? We used to just
Oh,
go
I get
straight
you.
down. We used to go
Yeah.
straight down, and we knew all the pathways. We knew all the emergency
So
cables down there.
you went on the goat paths.
Yeah, yeah. We knew the gorge like Tom Sawyer knew the Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
A friend of mine used to take me down the one spot. So many fish you just spearfish there, right? Um,
Yeah.
Not too many people could get there, but now I wouldn't even bother because
Oh,
the fish smell like the river. It's not not edible anymore, right?
yeah, and actually, well, I was going to say there's probably another reason you can't get down there is probably your ankles or your
Injury.
knees or your hips are shot, right?
Yeah, injury prevents. That's a pretty rugged climb, man. That's
Yeah.
you know
I
the
certainly, I would, hey, Gary Wilkins talks about going down and fishing down in the Whirlpool area. I would, as much as I would love to go down there, my knees and my ankles just could not take it.
Yeah, in a constantly changing environment too, from cave-ins and rock slides and everything
Yeah,
happening there. One day you could take a path one way, and the next day you got to go 40 feet up and around, right? And
yeah,
it's a really really changing environment all the time.
yeah, yeah. All right. Okay, so where are we? So Trudeau is Trudeau versus the premiers. It seems that Trudeau is fighting with the premiers. The premiers are basically been saying he's encroaching on their territory, and he's saying he's not. Right?
Yeah, it's a touchy topic, right? Who's right and who's wrong?
Well, this is actually, you see, unlike America, where you have 100% division on what is what is state responsibility and what is federal responsibility. There are 100% clear guidelines. I think, for example, there's many things that have been seen as provincial responsibility in Canada, but they've not been specifically designed as provincial responsibility yet. For example, healthcare, which is supposed to be provincial, we have federal healthcare acts.
Yeah, that healthcare thing is a little dicey too, because the feds dumped it on the province, right? And the provinces started working with it, but then you've seen some money disappearing from that, and now the feds have stepped in again. So it's a pretty dicey thing. Should the feds have dumped it onto the provinces in the first place? Do we want a ununited states like the United States is? From state to state, there's a different law for everything and a different rule for everything.
Yeah, one of the big problems of the United States is, of course, its criminal law. Criminal law is there's a criminal code for every single state. At least we have a single united criminal code, and we have John A. Macdonald to thank for that, because John A. Macdonald was one of the people who basically he was adamant that one of the biggest problems that they had in the United States, and he's talking about this in the 1860s, right? And he's talking about one of the biggest problems they have in the United States when the US is 100 years old is that the criminal codes in each state mean that there are massive differences in how criminality is managed throughout the United States, and that was rightly a nightmare. And hey, he hasn't even seen modern times and how big a nightmare that problem is, right?
So how far do we let our premiers go? If you get a whack job for a premier for 4 years and he's got so much power, then he makes look at Ontario right now. Our environmental policies are almost like a third world country within Canada now. So how far do you let a premier go, and how much power do you give him? And do we want our country to be from province to province so different that it's not like you're in the same country?
Well, yeah, and that's a fair comment, because in fact, actually, when you travel, one of the biggest shocks I had, for example, when I traveled across to Montreal, is that, hey, that highway that I thought was going to be continuing all the way through to Montreal stops at the Quebec border. You're down on 30-mile-an-hour road, 50 kilometer-an-hour roads there as soon as you cross into the Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? It's about 3 kilometers into Quebec. The highway ends, and now you're onto 50-kilometer roads.
Yeah.
You'd think there'd be some consistency there, wouldn't you?
What should the prime minister's role be? What federal policies and what federal strengths do we give, and what provincial strengths do we give? There's got to be a balance, and if you give the premiers what they want, they're going to just have each province be like a separate country within Canada.
Yeah, but you see, for example, wouldn't it be right that we would have a single Canadian standard of education?
Education, healthcare, certain things like that should be federal and should be standard, right, through the country.
Well, at least let's put it this way: that the federal government would create the standards. Maybe the provincial government is creating because, for example, taking the education example, the federal government would set the standard for what the level of education that we provide throughout Canada, in order that it doesn't make a difference whether you come from Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, or wherever, as to, so a degree, a level of education means the same thing in each of those provinces. And if you're hiring a high school graduate from New Brunswick, you don't have to worry about whether what their standard of education is. You can be assured that it is right for the job that you're offering them. Now, when it comes to the actual implementation, obviously the schools are located in Ontario, so the teachers are employed in Ontario. That sort of thing has to be managed within Ontario. So the standards would be set in federally, but how you manage policy is set local, has to be set more locally, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's where we got to figure out these. Even with this premier's meeting, you got all the premiers there. Why isn't the prime minister at that meeting?
Yeah. Well, in fact, actually, they do regularly meet with the prime minister as well. One of the I think it was at the last the provincial election. I think it was New Blue that published this picture of Doug Ford shaking hands with Justin Trudeau. Well, excuse me. It doesn't matter what the political party is. Doug Ford needs a working relationship with the Prime Minister of Canada, irrespective of what their political parties are. Right?
Yeah,
they can be opposed as whatever they are, but the point being is that the federal Prime Minister has to work with each of the provincial premiers in order to get jobs done, don't they?
Yeah, no matter what your political party, you still have to work with the governing party that was elected, and you have to respect the people put all the people in those seats. So no matter what political party they are, they have to work together, and you have to accept that as part of the deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now in the States, you have almost a war happening. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican. You're not even part of my own country in their point of view. They're almost enemies. We don't need that here. We don't need that. We want a government that works together.
Well, when it comes down to the premiers and working with federal government, and in fact our provincial government working with federal government, we expect there to be open lines of communication. Right? I respect that. I respect the matter that Ford is going to disagree with Justin Trudeau. He has every right to, right? And it doesn't matter who is in power, whether it's Doug Ford or Merritt Stiles, or whether it is Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre or Jagmeet Singh. I would expect there will have to be a working relationship with that person.
Yeah, your ultimate goal is to have a country that's running properly, not disarray and a war within your own country, right? It's not the way we want to go.
Yeah, and the point being is there's when it comes to even when it comes to municipalities, there are sometimes things we do, let's say like building a bridge, whereby those provincial priorities, municipality has a priority, the province has a priority, and there might be some federal development money that's available to build that bridge.
Yes.
Right. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration, and all of those levels need to be, in unison.
Yes.
Yeah. And hey, we build our country not upon those, we do. Well, obviously the rules and the policy, the acts that are put into Parliament govern what our country does. But when we physically build our country, we're physically building it by the roads and developments and industry that you put into an individual city.
Yes. So where do you draw the line here?
Yeah.
With the powers of the premiers and the prime minister. I truly believe that Canada needs a total revamp on its constitution altogether, and with that, they should be working with the provinces to come up with a better way to do things. But that's so much work. Everybody's cowardice to do that, right?
Well, actually, we have one. You see, we have one of the most modern constitutions in the world. There aren't many more. There aren't many newer. Funnily enough, Australia is a bit newer, but Australia has the same basic principles as we do. But one of the things that they forgot to take into consideration, there's a whole heap of things that happened post Second World War that. I remember we were asked in one of the early classes in like English legal in my law degree, we were asked, okay, so looking at the human rights that exist, that we've signed, the charters, etc., that we've signed up, what additional human rights would you put into place now in the 90s that didn't exist in those documents that were agreed in the 50s?
Right.
And it wasn't permissible to, the lecturer said it's not permissible to answer, to answer on the basis that we have perfect human rights.
Right? Yeah, and every change has to be scrutinized by so many different people before it's accepted. By the time the first original idea is made, it's totally turned, right? Like,
well, and the problem we have with the Canadian human rights, Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, is that in fact, actually, it more or less encompassed the Universal Convention on Human Rights and didn't think too much of the changes that had occurred post Second World War.
Right.
For example, it doesn't include the right for housing.
Right. There's a lot of little things like that aren't changed and aren't fixed, and there are problems with most of those things, aren't there?
Yeah. And part of the, and it's not like homelessness wasn't a problem in the 70s and 80s.
No, but I don't think it was as prevalent as it is today.
That's fair. That's fair.
If you look at the population of the homeless too, a lot of them seem to be younger.
Yeah. Well, in fact, actually, the homeless, the funny thing is about that, there was something, Dave and I found this article about 6 months ago. One of the big problems about homelessness is that typically the life of a homeless person, I think it's for adult males, we're somewhere in the region of 79 is the death age, the average death age for males. With women, it's about 83. And when it comes to homeless, the average age of death is about 50 something for both male and female.
I believe that. Yeah. And the younger people seem to be the ones that are getting hurt by this the most today. Older people on fixed incomes are getting harmed hugely, but a lot of them find homes and stuff, right? But the younger people seem to be the ones out on the street.
Well, the older people, the older people have often got, children that they can go to.
Yes, that too. You got the family to fall back on, right? One moment, please.
Yeah. So that's kind of an important factor in here. Okay. So all right. Yeah. All right. And that's an important factor to weigh into consideration with everything. Okay. So in terms of this meeting of the premiers, Our own Premier, Doug Ford, took aim at the federal government's $1 billion national school food program, which promised to deliver meals to an additional 400,000 children a year. He said the province feeds more kids for less money. Did you get that?
It's a huge thing that's needed. It's a huge thing that's needed, but and the harsh realities of today's world, right?
Yeah. Well, you see, the point being is that the feds were, basically, I think when we covered this national billion, the $1 billion national school food program, but in fact, what we were talking about it earlier on the year, and it's like this one of these things where I think the money is badly spent. One of the problems I have with government, even at any level, even is that it's rarely audited, right? It rarely actually makes sense. When you've got, for example, if you go and buy a product, you can get a reasonable deal, a software product, you can get a reasonable deal for you as an individual. But yet when, if you sell that product to a corporation, they get like, if you've got a corporation with 1,000 users of that product, they'll get like 20-30% off. When you're selling it to the government, the price doubles.
Goes up.
Yeah. Like,
yeah,
why?
that's so wrong.
So
wrong. It seems that everybody rapes the government and then complains that our taxes are going up, right?
Well, the worst of it isn't the software company that does it, but what happens is the government says, "Oh, we need 10,000, we need 100,000 licenses of X," and then they volunteer to pay, pay companies like Microsoft or IBM too much money.
Yeah, like you said, there's never any auditing on it, right? It's like we put the accountants aside, and
well, it's not accountants. It's what they should do is be, I'm talking about that as from the viewpoint of an IT, the spend they do use on IT, because when you think about it, there's if you're talking about just the province of Ontario, I was saying the other day that we've got, to my knowledge, at least 4 different portals that are used for the courts. Right. 4 different products used by the Ministry of Attorney General, one ministry using 4 products, and they put in for the major courts a thing called case lines about, and they've never really it was kind of put in lackadaisically, not really tested, not really used until COVID came along. All right. And then when at a certain time, it became obvious as soon as COVID hit that things like the Landlord and Tenant Board needed their own portal.
Right.
So the Landlord and Tenant Board went out with their money and created their portal. It became clear to places like the Small Claims Court, they needed a portal. So they went out to a company, they bought software to manage a portal. Same with other areas. And now we've got at least 4 pieces of software. Now, the first piece of software may not have been the most perfect solution that there was, but hey, had they just basically had each of those parts of the Ministry of Attorney General talk to the people who put in the first piece of software, we'd have probably had a much more user-friendly portal for all cases, and it would have only been one portal for everything.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't make sense to have 4 or 5 different portals. Yeah. And we probably
there's overlapping and
exactly. We overpay for things like
you got overlapping and overpayment of things and things that are overlooked because you have nobody watching the whole picture when you have so many different aspects working, right?
Yeah.
You have one person overseeing the whole thing, instead of having 4 or 5 different entities doing it. Would be more sufficient way to make sure that finances are working properly, right?
Yeah.
How many times do they ignore Auditor General's reports that say, we're going to be in huge trouble if we keep going in this route, or,
Yeah.
this situation cannot function the way it is because there's not enough money for them to do so, and then it's ignored, right?
And let's take another example that I painted about this type of thing before. If you're a private company and you own land on 2 sides of the river, you bought another company, another factory that happens to have, so you got 2 factories opposite sides of a river. You kind of think, well, what's the solution to this? We're better not having truckers drive around 15 miles to get from factory A to factory B. Wouldn't it be better if we build a bridge across between the 2 plots of land, and we'll put that bridge together? You see, what'll happen with the private corporation, they'll get a quote and they'll say it's $30 million to build the bridge. And they'll be saying to the company who builds the bridge, and not a penny more, right? And the company will build the bridge, and maybe they spend $35 million on building the bridge. They keep to the budget. Now, if that were the city building the bridge, or the bridge was between 2 cities on opposite banks of the river, that 30 million bridge would become a 350 million bridge, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we've seen the Burgoyne Bridge. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
No? And it's not that you cannot get the stuff built for the 30 million, but there's a cost to everything when you're building something like that. It's not that you cannot get the bridge built for that amount of money. It's that you don't actually have people who know how to cost effectively make projects work.
Yeah, and that's the same, like we used to have Ontario Hydro, right? And Ontario Hydro, soon as somebody would get a contract with them, prices go through the roof, right? Through the roof, because they know Ontario Hydro will cover it blindly no matter what, right?
Yeah. And it's like, I'll quote you 50,000, but my 50,000 runs, I know damn well my 50,000 runs out in 3 months' time, and then I'm back for another 50,000.
Yeah, and it happened a lot with Ontario Hydro. It was just like, as soon as you sign the dotted line, the money's just going to funnel, right?
Yeah.
And unchecked. And I don't know if it's just because they become such big entities, they don't have the ability to check, or if it's down the road they check. But there's so many mistakes made that way. It's like a feeding frenzy, right? All right, we got a contract with the government or Ontario Hydro, and we're going to suck everything out of them.
And let's look at that $65 million temporary monstrosity that they spent with ArriveCan, right? 65 million bucks minimum price is what we've heard about this one, for a $50,000 piece of software.
The insanity, you can't wrap your head around the irresponsible actions that have happened there.
Yeah. Honestly, if I'd have said to you, Mike, hey, my company, I've got 50 years worth of software experience. I've developed these projects for out the yin yang for forever and a day. I'll do this project for you for $1 million, right? And if you were the Prime Minister, you'd be going, well, that's great, that's cheap, that's and you should be paying attention to me, because I'm making I'm sending my guys in, we're getting it done for $100,000. We're pocketing a nice little profit out of it, but hey, $1 million is neither here nor there when it comes to government spending, right?
Yeah, and it's frightening.
And we shouldn't be spending on projects like that. They have not a clue about how much it costs to actually make that thing.
How does it get so out of hand, though?
Yeah.
Like,
well, you can set up.
How much did that company walk away with in profit?
Yeah. Well, you could set up you could say, you say you're opening a flower shop around the corner from yourself, and you kind of decide, hey, well, I've got to be able to sell my flowers on the internet, and you set up your website on the internet, and you're selling through the website. Well, you could probably get that set up by a local web developer for not more than a couple of $2,000 or $3,000.
Yeah, and then you give it as a government contract, and that's all of a sudden $40,000.
Yeah,
So how does it happen? How
yeah,
does it get so out of hand, and how does no auditing take place until it's too late?
yeah,
Because you or I would be thrown in jail for that.
yeah, yeah,
We'd be thrown in jail for taking that much money, right? And
yeah.
and I don't. That's the other problem with our governments, is nobody's really held accountable for any of this, right? There's no accountability at all.
Yeah.
Oops, we made a mistake.
Well, hey, we have to be realistic that things, people do make mistakes, including government, right?
Sure.
And for example, you'd say, well, we need to do, something, we need to do something because it's right for the people. Yet at the end of the day, when it comes to what's right for the people, doesn't necessarily mean that is that you pick the right solution. So you want to improve, let's say, post secondary education, post high school education for everybody, so that everybody has a chance to go back to college, right? Then you implement a policy, and very quickly after you implemented the policy, it's obvious to everybody that's an absolute disaster. So this is a time when you should be looking at second options.
Yeah, well, we got things like that happening all the time, right? We need lunch programs, she says. So we do need programs, but we also need to make sure those programs are run properly.
What she's saying is, I know Karen is a supporter of UBI. What she's saying is, if we had UBI, why would we need lunch programs?
Yeah, and that's again an overlap that's always overlooked, right? If the money's not going to where it's going to, then you need a lunch program, right?
Yeah. Well, take it. Anyway, well, we're kind of done for the day and done for the week anyway.
Oh, we're past the hour again.
Yeah, we're past the hour again. But I was going to say, that you remember back in 2008 when who was the president? Bush, wasn't it? The younger, it was Bush, right? Basically, Bush put in this thing where he put loads of he was rescuing the banking system because it was in a terrible nightmare at the time, and largely because they hadn't done they'd all signed up to the Basel Accords, but they'd never implemented them in the US because it will never happen to us. We're too big to fail, right? Well, essentially, they rescued the banks by giving a load of money to the banks, whereas in fact there was this former bank CEO that I met one time, and he said, the better thing to have done would have given $20,000 to each and every tax-paying American out there, because even if most of that money, most people would have gone, hey, here you are, Mr. Bank. I'm paying my mortgage debt back, so I've got a place to live now. If you had a debt, right. But even if you pissed it up against the wall, so to speak, by taking it to the casino and putting your 20 grand down on red, right, at the whatever, it's still circulating in the economy.
Right. You're still spending the money, and it's still working in your community.
Whereas giving the money to the banks essentially meant that, oh, now we can pay our bonuses to the CEO.
It absolutely helped nobody on the
Which helped
street.
nobody at all, right? and that was what he, this guy was a former bank CEO, and he said, look, this was something that was done very badly, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and even if it wasn't 20 grand that was given out, even if it was 5 grand given out to each and every mortgage holder in the country, it would have still helped the economy.
Yeah, because people are still paying the price today for the mistakes that were made then.
Yeah. And that's one of these sort of thorny issues, I guess. And that's a fair comment. That's exactly where Karen is coming from, because she's basically saying that if we had a basic income, you wouldn't need a lunch program.
Right.
Right. Okay. So Peter Biker, good morning, me and you. Very new to the show. Thanks, guys, for Talking Niagara. Another commenter from YouTube.
Awesome.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to have you on board, and I hope you come back. All right.
Yeah, and
I think we can.
With that, I guess it's time for the weekend.
Yeah, and have a great weekend, everybody. And don't go swimming in the beaches. I think find a swimming pool and do it there.
Have a great